Hey everyone, I'm Scott Cohen, your host and personal growth coach. Welcome to the Growth Coach podcast, where each episode I share actionable strategies and insights from positive psychology, self-improvement, and performance coaching to help you overcome setbacks, set ambitious goals, and really just think and feel like the best version of yourself. My goal with each episode is to leave you feeling energized and empowered so you can get back out there and live the life you've imagined for yourself. For more growth coaching tips and strategies, follow me on Instagram at IanScottCohen or visit my website, IanScottCohen.com, for more info about my coaching programs. But for now, let's sit back and dive into this episode of The Growth Coach. Okay, so welcome to the third and final episode of our mini-series on building and breaking habits. I started this series using James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, as an anchor text. We're going to reference that a couple more times in today's final episode of this mini-series, but I'm also going to bring in a couple other texts. But just to kind of recap and refresh why we're here. So ultimately, our first episode was about really what is underneath habits and how do we achieve change as people, and that focused on identity and beliefs. Then we talked about in episode 2 what a habit actually is, like what are the stages that you go through mentally and physically, really with your brain to enact habits and why do they persist, and then how can you short circuit them or strengthen them. And all of this is because it's really important to think about and understand habits if you're trying to grow or advance your life in some meaningful way. And this really comes down to your daily life. We're talking about the things you actually do, not some sort of grand achievement, that you're thinking about long term. This is the actual step-by-step process to get there. And if you're listening to this podcast, clearly you have some aspirations to continue to grow, to continue to improve yourself or grow and evolve your daily life to be something that really aligns with who you are learning that you are and the kind of energy that you want to bring to each day. And so habits is such a critical piece of that puzzle. But the one thing we have not discussed, which will be the subject of this third and final episode, is around motivation, which might be the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to habits. I think if you listen to the first and second episode of this mini-series, you probably understand the concepts fairly well. Once you hear them, they're pretty intuitive, I would argue. But it's like, okay, when I get into the moment of decision, that moment of choice between doing this thing or not doing this thing, how do I tip the scales in my favor and get myself going in a new direction? So that's really what we're going to talk about today. Quick refresher on habits in general. So episode 1, again, we started with identity. So James Clear's framework from Atomic Habits, he really talks about how we oftentimes start with the outcomes first. You want to run a marathon, or you want to lose 10 pounds, or you want to start a company, or you want to find a girlfriend, whatever it may be. And the challenge there is that you're going for surface level change, and you're not getting at the root, which is identity. So it's really about who are you trying to become. You're not trying to run a marathon, but you're trying to become a runner, because runners are the ones who run marathons, not random people who just decide they want to run a marathon one day. You actually have to become a runner if you want to achieve that sort of outcome, and many more outcomes that come along with being a runner, like physical fitness and health and etc. And so he really starts there at identity. Who are you trying to become? And then what are the beliefs that you require in order to get there? So what do you have to believe about yourself, and how can you build those beliefs? And so we talked a lot about how beliefs are built around the memories that we have of ourselves and the world around us. So, anytime I go to the gym is sort of another memory that is stacked as evidence that I am someone who is physically active, or I am an athlete. Every time I write, it makes me embody the identity of a writer. And so that's really where our beliefs and identity come from and how they factor into all of this. So once you're able to clearly articulate what identity you're trying to embody, it makes it a lot easier to understand the things you need to do in order to build the habits you're trying to build or break the habits you're trying to break. Because that's how growth occurs. Growth occurs when we change how we think and act, but change in a way that's consistent and stable and doesn't really go away. A lot of times when we go after just the outcomes, when we just try to run that marathon or just try to lose 5 pounds or whatever it is, just trying to find a date. Like we might achieve those things in the near term, but they don't last because we haven't built up the new identity that really sustains that new reality. And so still, it leaves this sort of nagging problem that I'm sure is in the back of your mind. It's certainly something that we feel kind of in our chest when we're just sitting down, deciding whether or not we want to actually act on this new desire to pursue something, right? So let's say you want to start going to the gym, or you want to start writing, or you want to start looking for a new job, but you come home from a day of work and you eat dinner, maybe you spend time with your partner, you're sitting on the couch, you're trying your favorite shows that you've seen a bunch of times, but it's relaxing and it's nice. And so how do you find the energy in those moments or on the weekends to break out of that routine and start pursuing and creating a new routine? So that really is where motivation, a lot of times people insert motivation as the reason that they do or do not do things. So that's really what I want to talk about in this last episode is motivation. So how do you create initial motivation and momentum? Then what do you do when that motivation runs dry? That is definitely something that will happen and always happens. And then also, what are some ways to get yourself unstuck? So for today's episode, we're going to reference Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I'm also going to mention something from Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And also, finally, I pulled out a few different suggestions from Adam Alter's book, The Anatomy of a Breakthrough, where he's got really some great ideas for people who are trying to innovate and trying to be creative. But I think they also apply here when you're just trying to build motivation or rebuild motivation in order to build or break these habits that you're after. So first and foremost, motivation, I wanted to look up the definition. So the definition is the general desire or willingness of someone to do something. So how can we spark that desire or willingness to do something and actually get you moving? So that's what we're going to do in the first segment, is really talking about how do you create initial momentum and what's holding us back from doing that. So this will be the third and final part of this mini-series, and let's dive right into how to get yourself that initial momentum. Okay, so motivation is such a big topic and really, really important. And I know it's on the minds of all of us whenever we're trying to pursue something new. And so it's really important to understand what holds us back in those moments of decision, those moments of choice between pursuing that new thing or not doing the thing we're used to doing. And so I think I wanted to start by going back to kind of how the brain works. We all are probably familiar with the term comfort zone. And the brain very much is where those comfort zones originate. And so if we think about in the past episodes, we've talked about neural pathways and how habits are really our brain creating neural pathways and reinforcing them each time you go through the cue, craving, response, reward, habit cycle. And the reason the brain does that, again, as we mentioned before, is because the brain is trying to automate different tasks so they're easier for you. And that comes from an innate instinct towards survival, just to make life easier. And every time you do something that you've done before, it also becomes more comfortable too, because it's predictable. That's the other thing the brain is really trying to do. The brain is trying to keep you safe instinctually. That's obviously, as humans, kind of where we come from. And while we've evolved a ton, we haven't evolved beyond that instinct to survive. And the thing that ensures survival is safety. And the reason that comfort zones feel as comfortable as they do and as compelling as they do is because they also symbolize instinctually safety. And a comfort zone really is created through routines because it's predictable. That's what safety really is about. It's about predictability. And that's how, when you start thinking about comfort zones as predictability, it's easy to start applying them to not only places you go or don't go, but also to thoughts you have or don't have. When I think we all know that feeling. It's like somebody calls us up, say, hey, you want to go check out this new place this weekend? You probably have a tinge of, oh, that's an unknown. I don't know what that's going to be like. And so for some folks, maybe if you're more introverted even, you experience anxiety or sort of this anticipation. That's really what anxiety is. It's anticipating the unknown. And because you don't know what's coming, it makes you unsettled and it puts your brain on high alert. And then when you get to things that are predictable, like, sitting down on your couch and watching The Office for the second, third time, which can be a great experience, and I'm currently doing that right now. That's why I reference it, and I do love doing it. It's a comfort zone. It's very predictable, and that's why you go after it, because it feels good, and we need that in our life. We need comfort. So it's not this is not about saying you don't ever need to be comfortable. But this is about understanding what feels comfortable and what doesn't. Because when you know what is likely to happen and what it's going to feel like, your brain puts you or keeps you in that comfort mode or that safe mode. Because again, it's about safety instinctually. But it's important to recognize that comfort zones are not inherently or objectively positive or negative. They don't really have sort of a moral, color to them. It's just because our brains are so incredible at creating them. Your brain can literally get used to pretty much anything. That's why humans are so resilient. And you think about it, think about through your life, the little things that your brain over time starts to see as symbols of comfort zones. So for instance, you think about maybe if you went to college and had a really tiny, crappy dorm room. At first you're like, wow, that's a really small space. Maybe it's dirty and old or whatever. But then over time, it becomes a comfort zone. Like you like your little niche in the corner. You like sitting on one part of your bed. And you get used to certain smells or certain light. That is, again, your brain all of a sudden recognizing, oh, wow, here's safety, here's predictability. And that's, now I am secure and I can sort of let down my guard. That's kind of how comfort zones work. And, the crazy thing is that you can develop them pretty much anywhere. You can get comfortable with a lot of things. It just takes that building up process. And that's really what habits are about. It's about creating those pathways in your brain that make something feel comfortable. It's why you can, songs become part of comfort zones or places. Thought patterns certainly can be comfort zones. And comfort zones are great for survival. They're great for rest. And they're great for the status quo. Like we need them. We cannot spend our whole day in sort of survival mode. But growth cannot occur in a comfort zone. And that's a comfort zone, again, physical or mental. So if you're trying to grow, which is probably why you're here in the first place, you do need to figure out ways to push your comfort zones. And another way to think about that is to push your brain to experience things that are slightly new or different, or think about things in a slightly new or different way. And what that's doing is creating those new connections, those new pathways. And it does feel strange, like we physically experience it as, fear or uneasiness or, insert any sort of adjective in here that represents strangeness. That's how our brain experiences it. And that is a good thing. So we'll come back to why that's a good thing. But in order to get yourself started, like, how do you create that initial momentum? So how do you create that initial push to get yourself to do something different? So I'm going to give you two tips here. And it's kind of based around a thought that I originally saw in Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art to Not Giving a Fuck, where he really talks about and builds his case around this idea that a lot of times we have motivation backwards. We sit and think that I'll pursue that new idea or that new hobby once I feel motivated. And so people sort of wait for that moment of inspiration that kind of gets them off the couch and gets them to start working or start doing or whatever it is. And Manson says, and other people have sort of backed this up, is that it's actually the reverse. You can't wait to feel motivated in order to act. You have to act in order to create motivation. And again, I'll say it again, you need to act in order to create motivation. So what does that mean? Well, we'll get into it from Clear's perspective in Atomic Habits, but essentially what it means is you need to start that initial building process, that pathway building process, You need to actually give yourself a chance to see progress, to see wins, to experience the new, and in order to give yourself, your brain, the ability to create motivation to come back to it. Your brain is not going to be naturally motivated always to try something new, again, because it kind of goes against the instincts of predictability and safety. That's where you as a conscious self can come in and really set the tone and take that first step. And so you can think about comfort zone on one side is where you're safe and secure. And so the thing I would recommend to get started is to pursue novelty. So novelty is sort of benign, newness, strangeness, something that our brain hasn't really encountered in that way before. And so if you're, for instance, trying to start a new workout routine, or you're just trying to start exercising more regularly, it might be worth doing something novel the first few times out. So, trying a new workout class, or doing a different kind of workout than you're used to. Doing something that is stimulating and challenging in a new way, because oftentimes that's enough to keep us engaged those first few times out. Now, novelty doesn't last forever, and we'll get into that in the second segment here, but it is a good bit of fuel to start with. So look for something novel, as a novel way to get yourself started. So if you're trying to write, maybe it's just writing down a bunch of words that you like, as opposed to trying to write a whole novel out of the book. And that brings me to my second tip here, in order to get us rolling. So how do you start building that momentum? Make your initial goals really, really small, and then stick to the limits that you place on them. Now, a lot of people will tell you got to take a goal and break it down into smaller chunks, parts. It's a very well-known concept, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I would argue that you need to take it even a step further, because a lot of times, people chunk out goals, but they still leave them in these huge bits of, these huge chunks, for lack of a better term, that are hard to get through. So, for instance, if you want to run a marathon, you might chunk out that training schedule to be like, all right, the first month I've got to run a mile every day. Well, that's a pretty big chunk, right? Like, if you're trying to chew on that as food, it's going to take a while. What I'm suggesting, and what a lot of research out there backs up too, is that take it even smaller. Go as minuscule as possible. So, for instance, if you've got a new idea, or you're interested in other career opportunities, just start with a single Google search, just one. Right now on your phone, don't even get up, don't even open a document to take notes, none of that, just do the search. Or if you're trying to learn something new or build new relationships, just send that email. Don't even make a big fuss out of it. You can keep it short. It's like, hey, I was thinking about you. You want to grab coffee sometime? A lot of times we try to think so far ahead and justify every part of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing that it gets in the way of us actually doing the thing. Another great example is if let's say you want to try meditation, for example. Set a limit for yourself. And this is something that I can't remember which book it came out of, but I really love it. The idea is that you limit your endeavors and stick to those limits. So for meditation, a lot of people is like, oh, I just meditate for 3 minutes or for 5 minutes. And that's great. It's a great example of this. So, I meditate for 5 minutes every day right now, just because I just want to do it. I just want to get used to doing it. Will I extend beyond 5 minutes at some point? Maybe, I don't know. But I just want the practice. And so what I'm saying is, and what some of these other folks recommend is, set a tight limit on your initial actions. So for meditation, an example might be just meditate for 60 seconds, period. Do not try to go over. And when you hit 60 seconds, stop. If you're trying to exercise, don't try to exercise for an hour or 2 hours. Go and say, I'm going to exercise for 10 minutes. And then when you exercise for 10 minutes, that first time, stop there and leave. The point is, you're trying to build and stack wins. This is about wins, right? If you think back to our first couple episodes on building and breaking habits, it's about building up evidence that you are embodying a new identity. And every single instance of you doing something aligned to that identity is you embodying it. And so it doesn't matter how big or small the evidence is. It's evidence. And so when you're starting something new, it's important just to start stacking evidence. Oh, I did the Google search, and then I did 10 minutes on the treadmill, and then I did, I went for a 2-minute walk, or I took the stairs instead of the elevator, whatever it is. Each one of those things are wins. And that's the only goal here. It's oftentimes, we try to, you're not going to become that person in a single instance. You're not going to lose 10 pounds in a single session at the gym. You're not going to write an entire book in a single session at the computer. Instead, you're trying to become those people who do those things. And to do that, you have to start small. And so oftentimes limiting yourself is the way to do it. So that way you don't judge the outcome. Instead, you just say, I achieved this outcome. I set it, I achieved it. Maybe the first 10 times I work out, it's 10 minutes only, whatever. Then you get used to, what you're doing is you're building the pathways in your brain. So you get used to going to the gym that you're not used to going to, or getting on the equipment you're not used to getting onto, or writing at a time you're not used to writing, whatever it is. You're starting to lay the foundations in your brain about what this stuff looks like and feels like, so that it becomes more predictable, so that it becomes easier to go back and do it. And then, of course, you start to apply the other things we've learned. You start to build in a cue, you get the craving, you then take the action, the response, you get your reward, and all of it starts to work together. But to start initially, to create that initial momentum, find some novel way to do it, and start really, 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 really small and stick to that smallness. Do not worry about a big swing, because again, the goal is to keep stacking wins in order to further solidify this new identity that you're crafting for yourself. Okay, so that's how to get started, how to get that initial ball rolling, that initial momentum. But what happens when you've been doing that and everything starts to feel old and you start to get bored? So that is absolutely going to happen to you, and that's what we're going to talk about in the second segment. It's like, what do you do when your habits become routines and they start feeling and getting old? Okay, so when habits become routine, that is a danger zone for us. And I'm going to use a couple of quotes from Atomic Habits here to kind of frame this. So James Clear writes that the greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom. And that's because, again, another quote, as habits become routine, they become less interesting and less satisfying. We get bored. Okay, so again, I'll say those two things one more time. The quotes are, the greatest threat to success is not failure, but boredom. And as habits become routine, they become less interesting and less satisfying. We get bored. All right, so this is really important, because a lot of times we'll start something new, you do it for a week, 2 weeks, maybe you do it for a month, and then you get tired of it, you get bored, and that is inevitable. I'm going to say it again, it is inevitable. All habits can become, and almost certainly will become, boring. Now, we should actually take this, first off, as a sign of progress, because know that if you are getting bored, that also means you're making progress, because your brain has already begun to automate the tasks, right? Like if I'm getting bored going to the gym, that means I've been going for a while. So that is a win. It's definitely another obstacle when you're trying to pursue growth and building and breaking these habits, but it's a win if you're building a habit. And so the question is, what do you do when you reach this point, or how do you avoid this point for as long as possible? And so this is where Clear comes up with what he calls the Goldilocks rule. And so this is really about the level of difficulty of what you're doing, and how much or how little you should challenge yourself in these routines. Because again, you go back to what I was saying in the first segment, it's about keeping your brain stimulated and finding ways to make things novel. Because what they found through research is that, and I'll use a quote here to make it very clear. So Clear writes, the Goldilocks rule states that humans experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are right on the edge of their current abilities. I'll say that one more time. The Goldilocks rule states that humans experience peak motivation when working on tasks that are right on the edge of their current abilities. Okay, so why does he say this? Why is it called the Goldilocks rule? It's pretty simple. So if something is too easy for you, it's not interesting and it's not stimulating. So you're not really enticed to do it. So for instance, if you want to become a writer and all you ever do is write one sentence at a time, well, that's pretty easy after a bit at least. And so once it loses that interest for you, you get bored, and it's much more likely that you're going to ignore the cues because you're not really going to get the cravings because you're not getting that reward from doing something that's satisfying. And so on the other side, again, Goldilocks rules, like the Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So on the one side, you got something that's too easy, which means it's not stimulating, it's not challenging. On the other side, if you make something too hard, so if you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to go out and run 10 miles today, but you haven't been running for the last 10 years, well, when something's too hard, it's discouraging, right? And when you try to do it and you fail miserably that first time, it's going to set you back. And it's going to make you think, oh, I can't do this, which is obviously not what we want either. So the goal here is to make your habits and adjust them over time to continue to sort of challenge yourself. And he uses the phrase, right on the edge of their current abilities. And he actually quoted a study in his book that says that and I don't know how they figured this out, but humans need to be challenged at 4% beyond their ability in order to stay motivated and engaged. Now, you might find that interesting. I have no idea how they figured that out. I should go find that paper. But because I don't know how 4% translates into my life. So it's not that useful, but I think it's good to know that stat exists because it gives us a little bit more clear of an idea about what we're talking about. Like, how challenging is challenging enough is the real question, right? So when you're trying to establish a new habit, you want to get started small, get some momentum, and then right as you're getting used to it, increase the level of difficulty or the challenge or the newness by just enough to make it different. So if you get really used to doing 10 minutes on the treadmill, come back and do 13 minutes on the treadmill. Or add in a session of lifting, or put yourself on an incline. These are all small changes that don't call for drastic growth in an instant, but what they do is they keep your mind guessing just slightly enough that it's going to keep growing and keep strengthening. Because again, as you do something over and over and over and turn that into a habit, just like we said in the first segment, your brain starts to build these pathways to the point where it's automatic. And so when something becomes automatic, yes, it's easier, but it's also less stimulating. And over time, it can turn into a comfort zone or a boredom zone. Because if you're exercising, you're not really super comfortable, but you can get bored. And then it makes you want to retreat to your comfort zones, which is the couch or the bed or whatever. All right, so find a way to make your habit that much more challenging in order to keep yourself stimulated and keep going. And think about it. Think about what would make the habit a little bit more challenging. Now, if you're having trouble deciding on how to make something more challenging, use your emotions. Now, what the hell does that mean? What I'm saying is our emotions are powerful, intuitive signals about who we are and where we are. And so if you're having trouble figuring out, okay, what would push me just a little bit more? Think through some ideas, and the ideas that bring up a little bit of nervousness or cause a little bit of anxiety over the anticipation because you're not quite sure how it's going to go. It's like, ooh, okay, I've done 10 minutes on the treadmill. Could I do 15 minutes at like a 7% incline? If that is what all of a sudden gets your heart beating a little bit faster or gets you starting to be a little bit concerned, that's probably a good sign because your emotions are signaling that you're approaching the edge of your comfort zone and your capabilities. And so when you get that level of anticipation, it's like, oh, you know what? I don't really know if I'm going to be able to do that. That is a good sign that you are at the edge of your comfort zone, which is exactly where growth happens. Growth is about pushing those zones out and being comfortable and being able to do more and more things in a comfortable way. And so again, if you're starting to feel nervous about pursuing this new habit, or challenge yourself that much more, that is a good thing. Again, you're making progress. So just to kind of refresh, if you've gotten to a place where your new habit is boring, that's progress too. That's a win, because that means you're used to doing it, which means you've been doing it for a while. Now we want to make it not boring and make it a little bit more challenging. So think about ways to that you could try to do that make you a little bit nervous or a little bit on edge, because that's literally the edge of your comfort zone. And so it tells you, okay, you're thinking in the right place. Give something a try, keeps it novel, keeps it interesting, and that'll keep your new habit going. This is also a way to use, or a thing to use when trying to break habits too, right? So if you want to break a habit, try to make it as boring as possible, because eventually you'll get tired of it just from its lack of stimulation. All right, so we've talked about how to initially get some momentum, do something novel, start super, super small and stick to those limits. We've talked about this Goldilocks rule. So doing this habit, you don't want something that's too easy for you because it's not going to be interesting enough. You don't want something that's too hard because it's going to be super discouraging. You want something right in the middle that challenges you, but is also, achievable. And so use your emotions to guide you to that place where it's like right at the edge of what you're comfortable doing. In the beginning, it might be something super small. If you're trying to go to a new gym and you've never been before, that can be, that's a social experience. It's a physically new place. So just going there, honestly, is a challenge in the first place. That can be enough. And then over time, you want to keep adapting. But I want to finish with one more segment specifically around what to do when you're stuck. So a lot of times we get do these routines for a while, and then you just get stuck. You don't really know how to get unstuck. Maybe something happens in your life that really sort of arrests your motion, stops you from growing. So what are some ways that you can keep moving? That's what we're talking about in this last third segment. All right. So what do you do when you're really stuck? Maybe you've been working on something for a while and you all of a sudden just hit a wall. If it's something creative, you probably experienced this before, writer's block, creative wall, whatever you want to call it. So in order to give you some ideas about how to unstuck yourself, I wanted to use another text as sort of an anchor here called The Anatomy of a Breakthrough by Adam Alter. And so this book is really interesting. Basically, he goes through research and strategies for how to unstuck yourself. And again, it's mostly in the context of innovation, around creativity. It's really focused a lot on that. But I do think a lot of the lessons apply more broadly to habits in general. And so I thought I'd pick out a few. So at the end of the book, he is kind enough to summarize 100 different ways to unstuck yourself. And I just went through and I just picked out 6 that I liked. So I wanted to share those 6 with you, because I think they have valuable lessons and they can help you in a tight spot or when you're feeling like you're losing momentum. So if you're doing something creative, one of the things he suggests is reducing the pressure to improve your creativity and performance. Now, what does that mean? And so I take this to mean that a lot of times when we're working on something creative or we're doing something physical, and again, I'm going to use like writing and going to the gym as examples, but there's obviously millions of other examples. A lot of times if we don't do better than we did the day before or than we did last week, we hold it against ourselves and we view ourselves as a failure. So for instance, when I go to the gym, I go on the elliptical, I choose a difficulty setting every time I go on. Now, the machine goes up to 25. And there was a time, maybe, 6 months ago, where I would do all my sessions at level 25. And that's just what I got used to. I was like, okay, I'm pushing myself. Then I got sick and I hadn't been on it for a while. And so I came back and I did level 20. And so I started to judge myself for not being able to be at that level 25. But then I also recognized that, if I'm at a lower level of difficulty on the elliptical, then that's just a different kind of workout. I'm going faster, it's working out slightly different parts of my body. And so there's that benefit to changing up what you're doing. But what I really think this is talking about, and again, his tip is reduce pressure to improve creativity and performance. It is this idea that the goal here, especially when it comes to habits, is not about improvement each time. It's about consistency. It's about continuing to do the thing even when you're in the face of like overwhelming, dread or despair. You just don't want to do it. Consistency is the key to this whole ball game at the end of the day. And so for me, what does that look like? In the gym, that might, there are days where I go and, I'm like, ugh, I don't really know. So I might do my time on the elliptical at a level 15. And it allows me to kind of speed up. It's a little bit easier to do. But the point is that I did it. I still did the 20 minutes on there, and I still made it over to the treadmill to do the 20 minutes on there. And so it's really about getting it done. It's not about always getting better, especially when it comes to creative things. If you're writing something or trying to build a business or whatever, it's about putting that work in each day. It's not about hitting the home run each day. Because that's just not how life works. And so reducing the pressure on yourself to always be improving is super, super important, and why I picked that out. Next one he talks about, and this is similar to what that first one, is lower your standards by default unless excellence is required. So I'll say that one more time. He says lower your standards by default unless excellence is required. So this is another great example where, I have a business, my coaching business, obviously, and when I was starting out, for marketing purposes, you got to get content out there. You got to put posts up on social media and all that stuff. And there is a, sort of a tension or desire when you're working on this stuff to really make it perfect. And you've probably heard the phrase like, perfect is the enemy of the good. And the point here is similar. It's like you could spend all day wordsmithing, your post on LinkedIn or whatever. But ultimately, the difference in terms of the impact it's going to have for you and your professional life or your business or whatever is minimal. And it's much more about the consistency over time. And so if you're trying to get momentum to build or break a habit, lowering your standards can be really, really helpful. It's similar to what we said at the top of this episode. If you're trying to start a new habit, start really, really small. Don't expect the best. The point is to get moving. It's not to be the best. The best are the ones who do it over and over and then eventually grow into the best. And so lowering your standards and not expecting your greatest performance of all time right out of the gate is super, super important. Because the goal isn't the greatest performance all the time when we're trying to build a habit. The goal is consistency. Okay, so the next one he says is accept anxiety as a normal part of high performance. Again, he says accept anxiety as a normal part of high performance. This is one that I've really embraced myself. A lot of times when we're doing something new, we get anxious. Again, anxiety is the anticipation of the unknown. And you can choose how to react to that anxiety. Now, obviously, there's anxiety about really serious things like health issues or family issues, and that's not going to work with what I'm about to suggest all the time. But framing is such a powerful tool that you can frame anxiety as excitement and as anticipation, because that is what it is also. Our bodies experience those things very similarly. And, excitement and anxiety are two sides of the same coin in my estimation. Just one has fear with it and the other doesn't. And so for me, what I've really tried to do is reframe times where I'm anxious about doing something new as telling myself that actually, no, that's excitement because I'm doing something new. I'm growing. This is me actively engaging in life. I am going to do something and, break new ground here. I'm going to break through my comfort zone. Anytime I get up and speak in front of people, which I've done so many times at this point in my life, I still get my heart racing when I'm about to stand up. And, my mouth goes a little dry. I can feel like my control over my words kind of loosening. But what I do now is I recognize that is my excitement that I'm about to step in and I'm about to really put myself out there. And to me, that is I always feel great after I do that. And so if you accept that anxiety, that anticipation of the unknown is going to be a part of this new self that you're building, again, you can view it as progress. When you encounter it, you know that you're actually on the right track. You know you're doing something that is going to make you stronger. It's going to make you grow. That's why it's so powerful to frame it in that way. All right, so reduce pressure to improve creativity and performance. Lower your standards by default unless excellence is required. Accept anxiety as a normal part of high performance. The next one, he says, act decisively when necessary, even in the face of uncertainty. This one's really important. I just want to focus on the word decisively because it's super critical. So what's really critical about decisiveness is, I think it's something that we struggle with so much today is, we're overloaded with information, we're overloaded with perspectives. And so what most of us do is spend so much time thinking about what we need to be doing instead of doing what we need to be doing. And I'll credit my dad for telling me this. He said once, the sooner you make these decisions, the sooner you can get on to decisions that you want to make. Now, that might not be the pithiest phrase or the cleanest one, but basic idea here is that a lot of times we just need to decide. You just need to act decisively and do the thing, see what happens, and then go from there. You can spend your entire life thinking about doing a thing, but doing the thing is the actual experience. And that actually combines with the last thing I'm going to share. I know I said 6. I'm only going to do 5 just because one of them I already said. So acting decisively when necessary, even in the face of uncertainty, was that 4th one. And it leads into this last one, which is accept that learning often involves direct experience in doing. So I'll say it one more time. Accept that learning often involves direct experience in doing. And I think this is a perfect tip and also fact that is a great way to close out this mini-series on habits, which is this idea that you can't build or break a habit without actually doing the thing. And that is also what life is about. That's what engaging in life looks like. It's what it feels like. Like we talked about in this episode, going beyond your comfort zone is when we oftentimes feel most alive. You don't need to live your entire life there because that's not how we're built and that's not what we need. But it is, if you're pursuing growth, which is why I assume you're listening to my podcast here, then accepting the fact that to grow, you have to do the things. You have to try new things. You have to experience new things. And the more you do that, the more you build up those neural pathways to really get comfortable with whatever that new thing is. And that's how habits work. You get comfortable with them because they become automatic. And that's your brain working with you and for you. And so hopefully these few tips were helpful when you get into those moments where you're stuck. And you can use them to really empower yourself. Because again, this whole mini-series about habits was really, how do you empower yourself to start growing and changing your life to be closer to what you want it to be. So as a recap, we started with the first episode around identity and how you want to think about who you were trying to become and the beliefs that you need to have in order to become that person. Then thinking about what would that person do and how does creating a habit or breaking a habit work. And so we had the 4 cycles in a habit, or the 4 stages, I should say. You have the cue, what's that trigger that gets you going or gets your mind wanting something. The craving is the actual feeling of desire for that thing. Response, the action that you take, and then the reward, whatever sort of reward you get at the end of that habit. We also talked about how finding novelty is a great way to get yourself started, and then it's about challenging yourself and staying consistent. So challenging yourself just enough not to be discouraging, but to be stimulating and to keep things new and to keep yourself growing and pushing the edges of your comfort zone out further and further. Because at the end of the day, this is about total wins. It's not about a single win. It's about total wins. It's about stacking evidence, supporting your new identity, embodying that new identity, that new person you want to become. So hopefully you've enjoyed this series, breaking down habits, using, again, James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I also referenced Hooked by Nir Eyal. Obviously, in this episode, The Anatomy of a Breakthrough by Adam Alter and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. But there's so many great texts out there about this. Hopefully you've enjoyed this series, and definitely, if you haven't already, sign up for my weekly newsletter. But that'll only keep you fuel and give you fuel to keep going. But We appreciate you tuning in for this mini-series on building and breaking habits. Hopefully you're now equipped to get back out there and start living the life in a closer way to what you envision. And with that, we will see you next time. Hey friends, before you go, I want to tell you about one more free coaching resource called The Gas Up. It is my weekly coaching email I send out every Sunday evening to help you get engaged and ready for the week ahead. You can sign up now using the link in the show notes or follow me on Instagram at Cohen to find the link in my bio. And if you forget, you can always find all this information and more about my coaching programs at www.ianscottcohen.com. Thanks again for tuning in to the Growth Coach podcast, and we'll see you next time.